Then you can go into the world and realize, oh, there's so much grief for the hungry children from that, pandemic. We have grain elevators full of food and wealth here, and families that are starving there, for people who have no opportunity. And you realize this is wrong, and you can tolerate it. You can turn and see the suffering of the world and let it into your heart, because you become steady enough and caring enough to be present for it all.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being with me today for this conversation that matters. And the only thing that ultimately matters is that we learn to love one another. I have two great people, great guests with us today to talk about just that. People who are well known in the fields of compassion, compassionate meditation, Buddhism, mindfulness. People who have been around that part of the journey of humanity, professionally as well as personally, for many years, and have much to teach millions of people about it right now. But both of them have very heady academic backgrounds, which makes their journeys particularly interesting. So I want to tell you a little about it. The two people that I'm talking about, my guests today, are Jack Kornfield and his wife, Trudy Goodman. Jack graduated from Dartmouth with a degree in Asian studies. He went to Thailand. That's where he first studied meditation with a Buddhist teacher with the Peace Corps when he went there in 1967. He holds a PhD in clinical psychology, and he is a founding teacher at the Insight Meditation Society and Spirit Rock Meditation Center. He is a husband, he is a father, and he is an activist. His wife, Trudy Goodman, has trained and practiced in two fields, meditation and psychotherapy. She holds a master's degree from Harvard University and a PhD in psychology. For 25 years in Cambridge, she did mindfulness-based psychotherapy with children, teenagers, couples, and individuals. In Boston in 1995, she co-founded and continues to serve as guiding teacher for the Institute for Meditation and Psychotherapy. She is also a contributing author to Compassion and Wisdom in Psychotherapy, a clinical handbook. So you understand, of course, why the work of people like Trudy Goodman and Jack Kornfield, who both of whom, by the way, I've known for many years, why their work excites me. Because in order for us to solve the problems of the 21st century, we are going to have to address the fracture of the 20th century, which was this division between head and heart, which has prevailed within so many of our institutions, our political institutions, our social institutions, and our economic institutions. We have been fractured as people, and we have projected that fracture onto the world in which we live. The fact that we have behaved without heart is at the center of all of our problems, both individually and collectively. And we are taught a worldview from the time we are born. We are taught a worldview which is basically loveless, which posits us as separate rather than one, which posits us as bodies but not as spirits, and which posits basically that we live in a fearful rather than a loving world. And then those thoughts are projected onto the world. And of course, the very fact that we have projected those thoughts then proves them true. And we continue to create and maintain situations both individually and collectively, which make it so. We have to deconstruct all that. It's not a luxury that we do so. It is an imperative for the survival of the human race. And that is why so many people right now are learning about the mystical core at the center of all the great religious and spiritual teachings. That's why so many people are meditating today. That's why so many people are learning what are the practices of open-heartedness that will heal this terrible fracture inside the heart. And ultimately, the healing that we go through as individuals, we will take with us, and we will regenerate and reform and repair all of the outer institutions of pain and suffering and injustice which so dominate the world in which we live. And I know I don't need to tell you, not only do we need to do that, we need to do it in a hurry. I hope that you will enjoy my conversation today with Jack Kornfield and Trudy Goodman. And remember, at the end of the interview, I will be taking a question. And if you have a question, you can write to me at Marianne at castmedia.com. So wherever you are, sit back. I hope you'll enjoy yourself. Here we go. Trudy Goodman and Jack Kornfield, thank you so much for being with me today. It's an honor to have you here.
It's a great pleasure.
Thank you, Marianne.
Thank you. Thank you. The purpose of this podcast is to help us articulate a more compassionate world, an articulation, hopefully, that will lead to a manifestation that I think you would agree with me is not a luxury, but rather an imperative for the survival of the human race.
Absolutely.
And no two people have articulated that more or better than the two of you. A lot of young people are particularly attracted these days, just as was true when we were young, to meditation, mindfulness, Buddhism, and so forth. I think one of the other interesting things that I found over the last 2 or 3 years is that as I age, I realized the archetypal and very practical way in which we become the keepers of the story. And a lot of the people who are interested in mindfulness, meditation, etc., don't know the journey that our generation took long before it was this mainstream thing.
Right.
And both of you have very interesting stories. Both of you were educated at elite Ivy League universities. Your stories embody the journey that our generation took to get us here. So I thought we could begin by about both of you telling us a little bit about how you experience in your own lives the journey to get to the point where you are the adepts and the teachers and the authors that you are.
You want to start?
No, you start.
All right.
I like you to start.
So there I was at an elite Ivy League university. It was Dartmouth, actually. I wasn't terribly happy. And I saw that the world was around me was not at all what I was told it would be. Within our society, the 1950s, where I grew up and so forth, there was still a tremendous amount of racism, and there's still a lot of it now, a tremendous amount of suppression of life, really. And so I became interested in some other alternative way of living, but it was also very personal. I was studying to go to medical school, and then I took a class in Asian studies. And this professor had come up from Harvard, this wonderful old guy, Wing-Sit Chan, and lectured about Buddha and Lao Tzu and Confucius. And sometimes he'd sit cross-legged on the desk. And he said, there are teachings in Buddhism about suffering and its causes and how to end it. And I sat up on my seat because my family was a really painful one. My father was brutal and violent and unpredictable and a wife beater. And we never talked about it much outside the family. But I didn't know what to do with all of that. And the minute I heard that there was ways that you could heal yourself and that you could learn to navigate the suffering of your life or the world, I became very interested. And by the time I graduated, I'd studied more, and I asked the Peace Corps to send me to a Buddhist country to see if I could find one of those masters that could help me, and worked on these medical teams in the Mekong River Valley and found a great teacher. And sure enough, it was tough living in this forest monastery. And at the same time, it was the very thing I needed, because not my education, half of it, the education I got was intellectual, was philosophy and history and mathematics and organic chemistry. Nobody taught me about forgiveness. Nobody taught me how to deal with my anger. Nobody taught me about what it means to make a deep personal relationship or how healing takes place. All those things that make us human in some way were missing. And that's the second part that I got in my training. And then when I came back, I lived as a Buddhist monk for some years to get trained. Then people around me were interested, and I met colleagues like Joseph and Goldstein, Sharon Salzberg, and Ram Dass. And then people said, well, will you teach us what you learned? So that was kind of the start of my career, my personal suffering, and the fact that I was out there marching against the war in Vietnam and seeing the, marching for, freedom riders and so forth, and seeing that we needed to change the whole culture.
You know, it's interesting to hear you say that, because so many times I have found when I was running for political office, et cetera, people would say, oh, all your talk about compassionate world and love, you stay in your own lane. That has nothing to do with politics. And I used to say, no, I come from a generation where we read Ram Dass and Alan Watts and did meditation in the morning. And we went to anti-war protests in the afternoon. The countercultural revolution at that time was all of the above. It was spiritual, it was sexual, it was musical, it was political. And that kind of whole person, whole world, holistic revolution of thought is absolutely necessary, I think, because without it, we're just reiterating the split that you just talked about, the split between the mind and the heart, which is, I think we'd agree, killing us.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what about you, Trudy? What was your journey here?
So my journey, I had a very different upbringing from Jack's. I had a really nice family, and my parents were people that I wanted to emulate. My mother, she was a homemaker, but she volunteered in hospitals. She was a great seamstress. She taught sewing to immigrant women so they could sew their own clothes like she sewed ours. And my dad was, really completely dedicated to world health. He was a scientist at NIH. He worked for the World Health Organization for 35 years. He was an innovator, starting research and training centers in developing countries. I mean, I really had a wish to be of service, and I had models for how to be of compassionate service in the world. And then I had a baby very young, but that experience, it was in the experience of giving birth, which, I was 21 when I got pregnant. I knew nothing about childbirth. And really nothing. Like that plastic cross-section that I would see in the gynecologist's office with a picture of the intestines and the uterus and the vagina. That was sort of my knowledge. And I had an unusual birth in the sense that I was alone a lot of the time, which would never happen today. And I think just being up against it and alone and scared, and I had a kind of opening of my mind into another dimension of reality that was so striking and so different. And the hospital just evaporated. And I was really part of this huge chain of being, every being that had come before me, every being afterwards, like in those department store triple mirrors where you see an infinite regress, it was like that. And
so you're saying that you had an enlightenment experience during labor?
During labor. And, but I didn't,
I've never heard that, but that's new. Whoa. Okay.
I didn't pay any attention. I thought, well, this is just what happens when you have a baby, right?
When you have a baby.
I didn't know anything. And after I had the baby, I really didn't think about it. I was completely preoccupied with having a baby and trying to figure out how to do that. And then again, when she was, but in the meantime, I got very interested in just watching her little mind develop. And I thought, how do we know things? Like, where does this consciousness come from? And during that year, my daughter came down with the most virulent form of spinal meningitis, and she was in a coma, and I was told she was dying. And she was in the children's hospital for 2.5 months. And at the beginning, it was really life or death, probably the first maybe month. And then, of course, she began to get better. But there was a moment when she coded. That is, all the doctors came running because her little veins had collapsed. And there you have this tiny little 2-year-old body in a hospital bed with all these there were 6 of them working on her. And I was just sitting and watching. And I had another one of those experiences where it was just like, I saw God, and I wasn't looking for God. I was just sort of like any mother. I was just stunned and kind of sitting there, and I was alone. At that point, I was already a divorced single mom, probably, 24. And I saw that God was not somewhere else, Marianne. God was in that activity of compassion of those doctors and nurses. And it was utterly clear. God is not, up there or over there or in the temple or in the Bible or in the Quran or, it's here. And that experience actually stayed with me. Whereas the childbirth one, I just forgot about, really. I never thought it was even a spiritual experience. And, I just didn't know. But that experience is when I started searching. And I found myself, when I was in graduate school at Harvard, reconnected with a childhood friend named John Kabat-Zinn.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. We're old friends from being teenagers. And our dads were working at the Pasteur Institute in Paris together. So we both had scientist fathers and lots in common. And I had been searching after that experience with compassion. I had taken psychedelics. I had gone to hear every Swami and every yogi, and they'd say, eat artichokes and do this mantra. And I'm like, no, I don't want to. But then, Jack will tell you, I don't like to be told what to do. And then I went to see this Zen master with John and Larry. And I knew, okay, he knows what I want to know. And I had been at Harvard. I studied with Carol Gilligan and Lawrence Kohlberg and, all these luminaries of consciousness, but they didn't know what I wanted to know. And I didn't even know what I wanted to know, but I saw it in that teacher's eyes. And that was the beginning for me.
I don't know if you know Dr. James Doty. You might know Jim Doty. Do you know him?
Stanford, sure.
Yeah, I think the work that he's done about how it's not just the brain that has an intelligence, but the heart has an intelligence as well, and how the body would not work without the connectivity between the heart's intelligence and the brain's intelligence. And neither does human civilization. Human civilization cannot survive without that sharing of information between the heart and the head. We, in the midst of all that there was a connection between the fact that we were all learning to meditate, that we were all so hungry spiritually, and at the same time, we were taking stands for social justice. We were taking stands against the military-industrial complex and so forth. And so that connectivity was actually there.
Yeah, and I didn't talk about it, but, that compassion that I saw that time in the hospital, it led me out into the streets. I was out there marching with
absolutely
cute friends out of the closet and into the streets. And, you
can't talk about a more compassionate world and make it only your little circle of friends. That's not the love that will save the world. Can't be just love for your own children. It has to be love for the children on the other side of town. Can't just be love for your home. It has to be love for the earth we share, which is the world. So now you're at a point where both of you are esteemed teachers, esteemed experts on Buddhism, on mindfulness, on all of these things that people now on a mainstream level have come to understand matters. What are the basic tenets of Buddhism and Buddhist philosophy and mindfulness that you feel are the most that people are the most hungry for and that the world needs the most?
So as a bridge to answer that, I want to go back to what you were just talking about because it's so important. People sometimes think that meditation or mindfulness is just an interior activity, that, navel gazing and solipsistic. But the very word mindfulness in Pali and Sanskrit, the early languages, is a compound word, sati sampajanya, that means mindful presence and mindful response. So that they say there are only two things. You sit and you sweep the garden. And it doesn't matter how big the garden is. That is, you quiet the mind and tend the heart and listen deeply to what matters. So you quiet the mind, you listen to what really matters to you. You feel connected the way Trudy talked about. And then you get up to the garden of the world. So then your question is, well, what is this practice? And, we live in a culture. One of my meditation masters was asked, tell me about, the modern world. How does it look from a master who lives in the jungles? And he smiled and he said, lost in thought. That we can is lost in our ideas and our opinions and fight about them and so forth. And we're not actually so here and so alive. So what mindfulness in a simple way is a mindful awareness or a loving presence of body and feelings, of what's going on in the mind and the circumstances. We actually have this extraordinary capacity to pay attention, almost as if we can step back a little bit and say, what's actually going on, rather than being caught in our habit and our thoughts. And neuroscience research, there have now been 8,000 studies and papers. It brings emotional regulation because you learn how to be present for all the storms of pleasure and pain and anger and fear and longing and love. And by sitting with mindfulness, you somehow learn how to regulate and tolerate. It's called opening the window of tolerance. You become able to tolerate your humanity, what Oscar Wilde called the tainted glory of your humanity. And when you can, then you can go into the world and realize, oh, there's so much grief for the hungry children from that, pandemic. We have grain elevators full of food and wealth here, and families that are starving there, for people who have no opportunity. And you realize this is wrong, and you can tolerate it. You can turn and see the suffering of the world and let it into your heart, because you become steady enough and caring enough to be present for it all.
Not only are you able to tolerate it, but you are more capable of transforming it. Yeah. It's counterintuitive, isn't it? But it's when we are detached from the chaos of the world that we can become most effective within the chaos of the world. You were just talking about Gandhi a few minutes ago, and Gandhi said that the leader of the Indian independence movement was the small, still voice within. I think a lot of the despair that people feel today is we need leaders. But the zeitgeist of this moment, it seems to me, is less about the soloist leaders. That today the zeitgeist is more about the small, still voice within, leading each and every one of us to do that which is the highest best practice for us in terms of the service we can be to the times in which we live. So isn't a large part of that quieting of the mind so that we can hear that small, still voice within?
Yes, absolutely. That one of the biggest questions for us is, how do we look within instead of outside of ourselves? Because in times of stress, in times of loneliness, in times of rapid growth even, we look outside of ourselves for guidance and for answers. And our whole education trains us to do that. And there's nothing, obviously to learn from outside of ourselves is incredibly important, but not at the expense of learning how to look within, which is not taught. It's beginning to be taught some in our schools, but it's looking within and learning how to not have to believe that constant, steady stream of chatter, of constant comment that follows every experience we have, to be able to hear that still small voice, to listen to the heart and to trust our hearts, because it seems to me that a lot of meditation practice, mindfulness practice, compassion, self-compassion, it boils down to trust, trusting our perceptions, trusting our sense of what's right for us, and being able to have the courage really to follow what we love and trust that it's good. And I think when people, we see people all the time when they take the time and they do the practice and they begin to quiet down, our true nature is calm and sane and peaceful and good. And that's what people discover.
There's such a confluence going on right now. People understanding the highest regions of psychotherapeutic understanding, the mystical understanding at the heart of all the great religious teachings in the world. People understanding how higher consciousness operates, the fact that our thoughts create our reality. There's a line in the Course in Miracles where it says, one day you will realize there is nothing outside yourself, that all that you're seeing outside yourself is a projection of what's happening inside yourself. And also one of the lessons in the Course in Miracles, which of course is a very Eastern in feel, very Eastern. I think Bill Thetford called it the Christian Vedanta. The idea that it says there is nothing outside the world. There's nothing in the world that is deep enough that can satisfy you. your roots are deeper than the world. And so all of the searching in the world, there is nothing in the world I really want. I think people are coming to understand that, are coming to understand the meaninglessness and the chaos of the three dimensions when they are not guided by love. But I think the practice of meditation is that which allows us to not only give up and surrender our attachment to the outer things, but to begin to embrace what you just said, that there's an inner thing, and that inner thing is loving, and that inner thing can guide us, and that inner thing can be trusted. Whether you call it the Tao or you call it the Holy Spirit, whether you call it the Christ mind or you call it the Buddha mind, it's this idea of this fundamental underpinning, which is eternal, which is constant, and without which we are fractured and we are destructive of self and others. But now the world is at a place where, as I said earlier, this is not just some luxury. This is now the imperative for our survival. This is Darwinian. The survival of the fittest now does not mean the survival of those who can be the most ruthless and the greatest perpetrators of brute force. The mutation, the evolution that is the only assurance of sustainability and human survival at this point is that we might become wiser, that we might become kinder, that we might become more collaborative. And everything that we're seeing, from racial inequality to neo-fascism to environmental degradation, isn't it just the collective expression of the fact, as Gandhi would say, that humanity is not in its right mind?
It is very much. There was a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff some years ago that summed it up this way. He said, "We're a nation of nuclear giants and ethical infants." That remarkable development of technology of all kinds, where you have the great Library of Alexandria in your smartphone, but we haven't developed the wisdom of the heart. We haven't done the social and emotional learning for our children so they know how to resolve conflicts and be with one another with all their remarkable differences. We haven't learned how to listen to that still small voice, as you say, and to guide ourselves. And so this is no amount of external development, no amount of technology and nanotechnology and biotechnology and space technology is going to stop continuing warfare, climate destruction, continuing racism. All these, as you say so directly, are generated in the human heart. And so mindfulness, the word, we both have adopted Ram Dass's word for mindfulness, which is loving awareness. That is actually our true nature, that when you hear about let's practice mindfulness, let's practice loving awareness and let it take us through that doorway to be present and alive and caring in love, which is what we really are.
And that the universe is not only self-organizing, but it's also self-correcting. So that when lovelessness has occurred, and then love is practiced, the universe knows how to correct and to heal itself. It's kind of a built-in immune system that the very nature of things has, correct?
Yes, that sounds right. And sometimes it takes a while, as Martin Luther King said, the moral arc of the universe, bends toward justice. But what did he say?
It's long, but it bends towards justice.
Long, exactly.
Well, that is the symbolism of the 3 days in the Christian tradition, and the symbolism of the 40 years in the Jewish religion. That the 3 days between the crucifixion and the resurrection, the 40 years between the slavery in Egypt and the entrance to the Promised Land, is the time it takes. When you've been in a condition of lovelessness, love is introduced. It's still going to take time. That symbolic time within time and space for the new order, for the regeneration, resurrection, reformation to begin. So we've gotten to the point where people such as yourselves, this is, today's rock stars, this idea of the teachers of the meditation and the spiritual, etc. Then the question that comes up is, do we have time? We get that the entire 20th century was this horrible break that Emerson warned us about, that Whitman warned us about, that Thoreau warned us about, that all of the greats of that time warned us about when they saw industrialization rising up, the break that it took, where it mesmerized us with things of the outer world, and the internal musculature began to wither away. I think that a lot of people see, yes, it happened. A lot of people see, yes, the devastation of the earth, the devastation of our societies is all a product of that. But when you say to people the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice, the next level of despair that I meet in people is, yeah, but we don't have time. That when you look at something like the environmental degradation, if we don't act radically within 7 to 10 years, there could be such heat and whole swaths of continents that there could be such environmental collapse, such economic collapse, food shortages, hundreds of millions of people who are climate refugees. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. Now, I know that the Course in Miracles says that in the presence of love, miracles occur naturally, and that miracles transcend time and space. Where are you looking at the state of humanity, the state of the earth at this time, knowing as you do the fundamentals of the spiritual traditions and what they have to say about how we got here and how we heal it? Where are you personally? Do you think we're going to make it? Do you think there's time? And do you feel there's a flowering now of enough mainstream opening to these things that humanity is going to make it?
Well, I'm an optimist by nature, and the practices that we've done our whole lives have really deepened, actually, that sense of optimism and trust. And in terms of the environmental degradation, there are certain things that have already gone too far. We know this. So to be able to do whatever we can, and there's so many people working on good things that we can do and that are happening, we don't hear about the news. And, I recoil from all the doom scrolling and doom pronouncements, not because they aren't true, but because we really don't know what will happen. And this was the first teaching that I received from my first teacher was the teaching of not knowing. He coined that phrase, don't know mind, which has come into common usage now. But, we only have now. We only ever have now. And I do believe in not survival of the fittest, but survival of the kindest is what's going to matter in our world. And that each of us to do absolutely all we can to support good initiatives, to create good initiatives. I started a meditation center, but we have a whole branch called Insight in Action, where we go out into the community and we teach mindfulness to people who ask, and we teach in Spanish, and we teach all over LA. And we do, I can't even list all the good things so those things really give me hope, Marianne. I feel like if everybody did one good thing for the earth, if everybody did one good thing every day for each other, we would be living in paradise, because this is paradise, actually.
My sense is that enough of us are positioned correctly now. We just have to step it up. And, Einstein said we would not solve the problems of the world from the level of thinking we were at when we created them. We know that when we meditate, the brain literally emits different brain waves. And the Dalai Lama, for instance, has said if we taught our children to meditate, we could have peace in the world. I think he said within 10 years, within 20 years, or whatever. Clearly, you look at certain regions in the world. I think the Middle East is an example. It's very obvious to me, I think, to most observers of the situation in the Middle East, Palestinians, Israelis, etc. The rational mind, the mortal mind, has gone as far as it can go. There has to be a breakthrough on some other level, or we are simply not going to be able to expand to the level of problem solving and the kind of problem solving that we're going to need, which is why making this stuff more mainstream is so important. Jack, when you said that the Buddhist teacher, you talked about a Buddhist teacher who, when asked what the state of the world was today, he said, lost in thought. Now that brought warmth and warmth to my heart and smile to my lips, because as a student of these things, I know what that means. I know that thought is the problem. But I think a lot of people would be listening to this and go, wait, what are you talking about that's a problem? So would you talk a little bit about what is problematical about thought, the way the Buddhists talk about it?
I want to connect it to just what you're talking about, Marianne, what we're talking about right now. Because our thoughts, while we have beautiful imaginations and, okay, we want to change the world, a lot of our thoughts are also worries and anxieties, and how do we do that, and self-doubt and judgment, and then, well, they're not doing it, who's better than who's really stepping up, who's not. That's the thinking mind, and it does that a lot. It's not the heart. The heart sees through a different doorway or opens to a different dimension. And from the heart, the time to begin is always now. As Trudy was saying, there's, no
time like the present, like the title of your book.
And you start exactly where you are. This is what we have. We have this. And the thing is that Wangari Maathai won the Nobel Prize for green belt in Kenya, 51 million trees by the time she got her Nobel Prize. She spent time in prison like every good politician should. Some for various reasons, but
some for the right reasons.
Yeah, exactly. She planted one tree after another. She was beaten. She was put in prison. All those things, and she kept planting trees. And there's a secret to this that's really important about when you ask about time, and that secret, especially since everybody paid so much to listen to this. Now it's time for the secret, right? The secret is to act beautifully without attachment to the fruits of the actions. Or as Thomas Merton, the great Christian mystic, said to a young activist, he said, you'll never know right away the fruits of your actions. Sometimes it might seem to bring about the opposites or do nothing. When you understand this, you start to realize that the only thing that matters is the truth and the value and the rightness of the actions themselves, of listening to your heart and saying, this is the world that I want to embody and make happen and live in some very, very deep way. And so the mind is an organ that tries to protect you. Often it's the organ of fear. And sometimes, the self, the fearful self, the organ of separation. The heart says, no, we have greater capacities. When we go deep inside and get quiet, everything is in change, and we can begin anew, even in this moment, and enact what we want this world to be. And more importantly than that, we can join hands, because what we need now is not the sense of interdependence, but of interdependence that we're actually, and you see it from the pandemic and the climate change, we are so much in it together. And this is the kind of deep revelation that meditation brings, and that Trudy had so spontaneously, giving birth and seeing that all the mothers of the thousands of years were in the line of life giving birth to itself. That when we speak the heart, we know that it's not just my life, it's our breath, it's our life.
You must have some profound spiritual, every mother has a profound spiritual connection to our children, yes. But you and your daughter, wow. To have had that experience while giving birth to her, and then that experience at her side when she was in the hospital, what could have been a near-death situation, or was a near-death situation. So that's got to be a whole fascinating story right there, obviously, that your motherhood connected you that way. And I don't think it's an accident that our political and our economic systems were devised before women had a voice in the public sphere. And our knowledge and our understanding, particularly of children, particularly the continuation of life through childbirth, and particularly through the close observation and relation to children in early childhood. If the wisdom of what you see from being up close and personal with a child in the first 8 to 10 years of life was imprinted and infused into our political and economic systems, we would have a completely different world.
Completely different world.
And as you were saying just now, Jack, the mind of fear, fear is to love. The Course in Miracles anyway says fear is to love. What darkness is to light, it's simply the absence of the other. And it's like the mind of fear shows us one world and the mind of love shows us a completely a parallel universe. And putting the two together, and I suppose that's what meditation is about, right? Is the melding of the heart and the mind.
Yes, and holding the mind in the heart so that there's a compassion, because the mind is doing the best it can. It's trying to protect you. It's trying to make it, you say, thank you for all that. You work so hard. I appreciate, thank you for trying to protect me. I'm okay right now. I want to live from love and not from fear. Thank you. So it's not like you have to get rid of thought. It's useful. You can plan and so forth. But to know who you really are is not those thoughts. You are the loving awareness itself.
I keep going back in my mind to the fact that line about our being, what did you say, nuclear giants and ethical infants, that phrase was uttered by the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But at the same time, there is in our politicians a lack of empathy, a lack of understanding what war actually does to people that is so shockingly horrifying.
Well, it makes me want to say something very controversial, and I can't say I've thought it all out, but there's a way in which I regret that we ended the military draft.
Oh, absolutely. I don't. You're absolutely right. People. I mean, when we were young, it was our brothers. It was your fathers, your sons, your friends. So the Vietnam War, it wasn't other people over there.
That's right. It was the senators' sons and the generals' sons and daughters. And all of a sudden we have to look, and we can't send somebody else to do dirty work, but we actually have to look, is this worth the blood and treasure? Is this morally the right thing to do? It's not economics anymore. It becomes something much more from the heart.
And also, when you think of how many people who join the military today are doing so because it's the only way for them to get educated. It's the only way for them to have some of the opportunities in life that every American should have. It's just another, not even, and the corruption goes so deep. The rot, the moral rot there goes so deep, including the fact that our military budget is hundreds of billions of dollars above and beyond what our military leaders even say that they need. If you could, you said one thing, which was about the military and about the draft, which I think is a reasonable conversation. I want to talk about something else, Jack, that you've mentioned in terms of your own past, in terms of your younger years, that I think is fascinatingly come back around again with this younger generation and the new era and the new layers of consciousness studies, and that has to do with psychedelics. You must find it fascinating that's the conversation again. Everything all comes back around again. What are your thoughts about all that?
Well, first of all, I'm tempted to throw it back at you. I will answer. Do you have a background of experience in this domain?
Yeah, I was 17 once. I was 18 once. I was a kid. Yeah, I was a child of my generation.
I know.
I remember walking around all day. If Nixon did this, there'd be no war. If Nixon did this, there'd be no war. And you know what? I was right.
True.
And we were touched by something. I mean, it's a conversation that you have to be very careful about because of the dangers out there. And I don't want any young people to underestimate the dangers, particularly today. But yeah, I mean, it's true. So, all right, you threw it back at me. Now I'm throwing it back at you.
Yeah. So one of the things I noticed, first of all, it transformed me. As in that era, as someone who took LSD and mushrooms and various psychedelics, but I wasn't interested in the other drugs, but the ones that opened my heart and showed me the mystery of consciousness, even before I went into the Buddhist monastery, they were an enormous gift. They changed my life. And now I see this resurgence because they were demonized. And they weren't just demonized because they were dangerous drugs. Yes, everything has to be used properly. They can be misused. And we're Americans. We know how to misuse anything. But that's not the point. They actually are a tremendously powerful gift as well. And most indigenous cultures, the have used peyote and has used mushrooms and have used in India soma and various things like that, to know that it connects us with the world in this very deep way. So used respectfully, it becomes part of the spiritual journey for many people who are drawn. And it has surprising gifts for those who use it. It really does. And most every spiritual teacher I know of our generation all got started. It was part of their, and now that it's not so fearful again, and there's good science, people are beginning to realize, as Johns Hopkins research shows, even one psilocybin session guided in the right way can lead someone from Great Depression to an uplifting of the heart and a freedom from that inner bondage. So there's a great gift in them.
And they're doing extraordinary work with veterans on this issue. But I do think it's very, very interesting that this is coming back around. And I certainly agree with you. It's not an accident that it was so much a part of the generation of those of us who first emerged within this initial flowering, and how these things, generations go in circles. I think it's so interesting. I notice in my relationships that when I meet people who are younger than the millennials, the generations younger than the millennials, whose parents grew up reading the kinds of books that we all write. There's a sort of spiritual tonality there that's like they get us, isn't it? It's like that's who we were, the new bohemians, the new hippies. Well, I think both. I'm sorry, go on.
I wanted to say, Marianne, we weren't the first. I mean, plant medicines, as Jack said, they've been around in all cultures. And when you get sensitive enough, you can actually receive the messages of plants and beings and have intimate connection with them. In ways that we just don't learn about, or that when you hear about, people think, oh, that's just mystical, fuzzy, I don't know, just mystical stuff. But it is mystical stuff, and it is true. And I just want to offer a bow to all of the medicine people who discovered the plants, who, made it possible for us to really open our eyes in ways that we might not. I mean, I had already had those experiences that I shared with you, but I also was looking for a way to understand them and a way to relive them in some way. And while the medicines, and I want to echo your warning, because I have
there's nothing to be casual about either, right?
I have a family member who, I think it was on their 4th LSD trip, had a psychotic break and did not come back for years. So it can be really dangerous, not just a little dangerous. And that's true. But at the same time, having those doors of perception opened really is what motivated, I think, many of us to want. I know for me, and I talked about this in a podcast with Vince Horn from Buddhist Geeks, that I had a glimpse of the utter perfection of everything while tripping on LSD. And I simultaneously had the thought, why do I have to be stoned to experience this? This is
right. And I think that's what a lot of us got from that time. Once we had that, we didn't, then you don't need it, because it took you through the door. Yeah. It took you through the door. I want to go back just a moment. This idea of being fully invested in an effort and unattached to the result that you were talking about before, and Thomas Merton, et cetera. And there's that marvelous Talmudic line, you are not obligated to complete the task, but neither are you permitted to abandon it. I think that's so profound, the idea. Susan B. Anthony did not live to see the passage of the 19th Amendment. But she gave her life to it. I always feel like every time a woman votes, that her soul, wherever it is, her soul must tingle. And I have found it interesting. You were talking about the passage like of childbirth. One of the things that I find interesting about getting older, in addition to the keeper of the story aspect, some people say you get more conservative. I find you get more radical, because why not just own it, say it? Yeah. And it's interesting because on one level, it's counterintuitive, because on one level I could say, I'll probably be dead before the shit really hits the fan, But somehow my sense of saving the world for our great, 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 great grandchildren who will never even meet, it's almost like I feel a greater urgency the older I get. Do you feel that as well?
Well, I do. I have grandchildren who are teenagers, and they are old enough to be questioning what's happening in the world, old enough to watch, that first presidential debate and think, oh my gosh, is this what adults who lead our country are like? And they have brought home to me, as well as our little grandson, who's just 2 years old. When you have them in your life, when you see them growing and you see their idealism and you see their wish to be part of making a world a really great place, I feel that. I feel that for them, for their children, just what you were saying, their children's children. It doesn't matter that we'll never meet them. We are their ancestors. Just as I derive, inspiration from my ancestors, we are their ancestors.
And that's what I found becoming a mother, such a sense of connectedness to generations before and to generations after. Okay, so before we wrap up, I want to throw at you is probably the supreme question on a certain level for someone who says that the totally open heart of love and compassion is everything, and at the same time has such a profound realization of the damage to the world that is done by heartlessness. Give us your wisdom about Donald Trump as all of us try to wrap this thing up, heal it, move beyond it. What words can you leave us with, not just about Trump, but about the deeper underlying miasma of loveless thought that we know in many ways formed a kind of petri dish out of which he emerged? And that's not to say that every person who voted for Trump is a loveless person, because I don't believe that. But I would love to hear your thoughts about our contemporary situation and where we're going from here. I think that Mary Trump did us a big favor. I think a lot of the sort of psychological analysis that she did of Donald Trump was actually very helpful and opened a lot of eyes and really helped a lot of us to reconcile and to, in our own way, have greater compassion for him as well, because he clearly was a damaged child. Well, I'm extremely, I'm sorry, what were you saying, Jack?
I was going to say, what matters to me, and everybody who's looked in some way beyond him as a personality and his own trauma, and then all the destructiveness that can come from that trauma, is how he and politics itself play on people's fears. And that in some way, I think, it's part of the essence of how politics works, that you get people's attention and their support by scaring them and saying, these people are coming, the enemy du jour. It can be the Mexicans, the immigrants, the communists, the blacks, the yellow, whatever. And in such uncertain times as we have, it's easy to activate that part of consciousness. It's sort of the brainstem. Okay, is somebody going to come and harm me and my family? So we actually need nationally somehow to move from the psychology of fear to the psychology of love, of connection. And that's the power that will get us out of it. The only power, actually, that has that capacity. And this is really the movement that's required. And it's both an internal one, but it's also being willing, with loving awareness or mindfulness, to look at the kind of fears and realize that that's not who we are. That's not how we want to live as a people, as a family, as a nation, or as a part of the world. And to shift from that, that's really the inner work, and then the outer work. And it's not just a grim duty, but it turns out that it brings a tremendous amount of joy. People think that, being an activist is all about being angry. But in fact, some of the very best and most wonderful activists that I've worked with and been with have this huge open heart. And I think Martin Luther King talked about moving from the fatigue of despair to the buoyancy of hope, that there's a kind of sweetness to be able to say, I will plant the seeds that my great-great-grandchildren will benefit from. I will plant those trees. I will make this world different. And not only that, I'm going to do it out of love and join hands with others. And this isn't a fiction.
That was so eloquent and so profound and so beautiful and such a gift. I can't thank you enough. And it brings me great joy to think that this conversation will be heard by many. You have already touched millions of lives, both of you, with your teaching and the space that you hold in the culture. But thank you so much for stopping by this podcast in this particular little space in order to share your wisdom and your kindness and your profundity with us. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful.
And thank you, Marianne, for what you're doing to blend, heart and mind and politics and love. Thank you for your work in the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you deeply. It feels like we are kindred spirits in some journey.
Always. We've always known that. We've always been in the same tribe, and I hope that our journey will continue together. Thank you so much. God bless you guys.
Bye.
Thank you. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I think Jack Kornfield and Trudy Goodman are just wonderful, and I hope that you'll look up their books and look up their meditation centers and take full advantage of all the gifts that they have to give us. All right, my question that I'm taking today is from Gerardo. Dear Marianne, I've recently been struggling with the law of attraction at work and social justice issues. Throughout my whole life, I've been at a place of never having had to worry about whether I would have food on the table, a roof over my head, clean water to drink, and comfortable clothes to wear. I've been blessed with more than that. My parents paid for my education through college, made sure that I always had private health insurance, and pretty much everyone in my extended family is in this same boat, meaning I don't really have to worry about them experiencing severe hardship. All of this has helped tremendously to get me to a really solid place in all aspects of life, and I feel extremely fortunate for this, especially knowing how different life is for billions of people around the world, and even for millions in the richest country in the world, the United States. I wouldn't say our family is rich, but we're pretty well off, and if I had to take a guess, we're probably in the top 10 or 20% of the population income-wise. Probably, Gerardo, given what you just said, probably higher than that. Many of my extended family members started businesses and grew them to a good level that provides a really comfortable life and one in which we feel safe. I look at the world and I wonder, is it fair that I grew up with all of this and many, many people didn't? I know the answer is no, it is absolutely not fair. To me, this is not okay. I'm not saying we should all be completely equal in our starting spot, but we should at least all have a basic minimum guarantee of basic necessities to life: food, clothes, shelter, healthcare, and opportunity. Am I being too idealistic here? To all of the economic privileges I described before, add the fact that I am young, healthy, fair-skinned. I look really white compared to your average Mexican, and a cis male. My situation is basically the epitome of all privilege. I have read many personal growth books, and I believe in the law of attraction. I believe that anyone has the power within themselves to achieve all of their dreams and fulfill their deepest desires. Therefore, part of me wants to believe that it is my alignment with this law that leads to success, and that if I can do it, anyone can too. However, I feel a conflict within. I wonder how much of my success is much easier just because of my privilege. It does make me wonder if anyone can achieve anything using the law of attraction. It's simply not true for all of us, especially when you look at the systems of oppression that we consciously or unconsciously operate under in our societies and government. For certain aspects of our population, the odds are against them. Is there an empowering way to look at this? How can I use the law of attraction without neglecting or becoming blind to others' pain? Is there a way to view my privilege as something other than part of an unfair economic system and unfair repression of people who look different than me? I know I can get more involved in my community and our country's politics to drive change toward social justice. However, I think answering the above question will help me move about this with more clarity and conviction, as I would like to use the law of attraction to generate positive change. Thank you so much for your willingness to take in questions and give us your thoughts. Gerardo, 32-year-old Mexican-American from Chicago, Illinois. All right. I'm so glad you wrote, Gerardo, because there is so much here. So Yes. Is it very, very important and wonderful that we're all learning that the power of consciousness is the most creative force in the world. And that as we detach our thinking from our individual stories of victimization and hardship, we can create unlimited possibilities. Is all of that true? Yes. But it is not an excuse for maintaining or perpetrating systems of injustice. I've spent a 35, 36-year career, Gerardo, teaching what is essentially, this law of attraction. They give it a new name. This is ancient truth. The idea that as your mind expands, and most importantly, however, you want to add to that moral compass, as your heart expands. Yes, where there is love, miracles occur naturally. But one of the things that I've seen in my career, which really changed me, was, yes, people who are living in desperate circumstances, there are miracles and there is a way to change your life. But why are they living at the effect of such mean-spirited public policy to begin with? And I know in my life, as hard as I have worked, I also realize how lucky I was. Whether it had to do with my family, whether it had to do with my schooling, whether it had to do with public libraries, whether it had to do with Oprah Winfrey putting me on her show and giving me that exposure for my writing. You and I, Gerardo, are no smarter, no more talented, and have no more God-given potential than every single child, that any American child should lack health insurance, that any American child should lack medical care, that any American child should lack the food they need. We had over 38 million people were hungry in America. Thank God we don't have starvation in America, but we have serious hunger in America, and this is only being exacerbated by this pandemic. So those of us, I think, to whom much is given, much is expected and should be expected. So yes, Gerardo, practice the law of attraction, practice your opening your heart to go with that, because you don't want it to be just, I'm using the law of attraction to get what I want. There's nothing spiritual about that. That's not the spiritual mountaintop. That's magic, but it's not miracles. Magic is where you use those principles to get what you want. Miracles are where you place yourself in service to love, that it might use you. But it's never just for yourself, ever. So the fact that you are comfortable and that you don't have to worry about money, there's a reason for that, so that you don't have to be weighed down by that, so that you can go out there and you can try to make the world a better place. This change must be made. And it will be made. It will be made because of a revolution of love and justice, or it will be made because of a revolution of violence and pain. No society in history has had this level of inequality and had it remain. It's unsustainable. We are on this earth to love one another. And for our collective expressions via political and economic policies, just like with our individual expressions, free will means you can. But there's a limit past which your loveless thought and loveless behavior will have consequences. And at that point, you better change your mind and change your behavior. And it sounds to me, Gerardo, like you're going to be one of those who are going to work on making it happen. And I wish you the very best. And the very fact that you have such an awakened heart combined with privilege and combined with a knowledge of your privilege means there's a lot you can do to help repair the world. Thank you so much. Okay, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast today. If you have a question, write to me at Marianne at castmedia.com. And if you're enjoying the podcast, I hope that you go to iTunes and rate it and review and tell people about it. And look us up on YouTube and all of that. Until we meet again, I send you my love, my all best wishes, and gratitude that you were here. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.